And we are live. Hi, welcome everybody to this week's episode of Wicked Connected. Today we welcome Joe Voss for our 25th episode. So only a quarter of the way to 100, which is pretty exciting here. And today we have an episode titled High Impact Finance, Networking, and Leadership. So Joe is a fractional CFO, and I welcome him today. We like to start these off, Joe, by just asking a quick question of what networking event have you been to recently? Why did you like it, and what was exciting about it?
Sure. I've been to several, probably maybe half a dozen or a dozen this year alone. But one of the more interesting was an FEI, that's Finance Executives International, had their major event for the spring called the Business of Music. And it was held in the, I wish I could remember the name of the venue. It's inside the Garden.
Big Night Live.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And, that was interesting for a variety of reasons. It's probably one of the more well attended events. It had live music. It had some folks talking about their role in several parts of the music business. But most importantly, I was able to meet and chat with both folks I knew and people I hadn't.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Joe, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us a little bit before we dive into questions about networking. What do you do? What's your role?
So I'm a fractional CFO, and that people say fractional CFO, and that's a fancy word for part-time. And what it means is I have 2 or 3 clients at any given time, and I will divide my time based on what each of them needs. And the idea is that these are companies either in a growing phase, but not able to either afford or choose to hire a full-time CFO. They typically have other finance folks doing the major work for the company, and the CFO provides things that you get at the level of a CFO, but less than full-time commitment on both parties.
Yeah, Joe, do you find yourself in specific industries or kind of revenue sizes, that sort of thing, where it's most applicable?
So right now I'm supporting a SaaS company. I'm also supporting a logistics company that provides devices and software in the logistics industry. Mm-hmm. And the SaaS company is in the single-digit millions, and the other company is double-digit and growing.
Great. Yeah, of course, CFO is near and dear to my heart. So I'm doing an interim CFO role as well. So I can appreciate that. But no, very, very cool.
Yeah, no, it's basically a consulting type arrangement. So the power of networking to find future relationships that could provide more business, I can't think of anything better in terms of bringing up opportunities for you.
Go ahead, Amelia.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of segment that into networking. So how did networking kind of pave the way for you to become a fractional CFO?
So I became a fractional CFO like most people do, which means you have a full-time situation, you're aligned with a company, working for someone. And if that changes, the question is, what do I do now? And so after going through a period of looking for follow-on full-time situations, the idea of branching out into something on a fractional basis comes up. And the situation I have now, I work with a CFO center. That's the company with whom I'm aligned. And that situation came about because I was at a networking event. I met someone and they said, wow, I think you should talk to this person, and made the introduction. And long and the short of it is that's how I got to this situation. And my first client with the CFO Center came about because another person I met through networking reached out to me some months later and said, hey, I work for a larger consulting company, and these folks are a little bit outside of our market. You may want to give them a call and see how it may shake out. There's a client. And actually at the February event at FEI, I ran into someone I knew who I'd met through networking, and he put me in touch with the logistics company with whom I'm working right now. So the power of networking is both, it's blatantly obvious and sometimes elusive to realize at the same time.
As you found yourself moving into this kind of fractional role, was networking something you had always done, or is it something that you've had to sort of ramp up as you've moved into this role?
It's a bit of both. I've always been very keen on getting to know people in the businesses where I worked and to expand the professional relationships, because, even if you aren't thinking of it as, something that's going to provide monetary value, I've always enjoyed knowing the people in my professional situations. And going back as far as the early to mid 90s, that the power of that relationship and that value led to follow-on situations. For an example, I'm working in the structured finance part of the mortgage business, and things change in the early 90s, and someone with whom I worked in that company calls up and says, "Hey, these folks over here need somebody, and I think you'd be a great fit." So that leads to something, and then that, a few years later, something else comes up where I, go into a different situation, and same thing later in the early 2000s. So I've, I actually like to think about, because I spoke with this person or met this person, what situation leads to another relationship or another connection, and there's so much opportunity in getting to know people, and doing it not because you're looking for something and you want to use that relationship, but because you care about their situation.
Yep.
And you want them to think about you, both as a good contact to know, but you never know when that's going to come up. I've had referrals that took years
Yep.
Yeah.
to come to fruition. And again, it's not like I want to meet that guy because of what he can do for me, or I want to meet that person because it's going to benefit me. It's best to approach from a standpoint of getting to know people and learning what they do, and sometimes having conversations that you think this will have absolutely zero value to me, but because you try and be a decent person and share something that they might find insightful.
Yep.
It's not like I think I'm a font of knowledge, but you talk enough, maybe something will come out someone could use. And it just, I don't like to think of karma as a thing, but if you put professional effort into your relationships, then someone's going to benefit. And doing something nice for somebody else and seeing that come to fruition, to me, is as important as something good happening to me.
Absolutely. And that's something I was taught when I first started networking too, was I felt like I started networking when I was in my 20s. So I felt like when I was meeting with these fractional CFOs, these CEOs, I was like, what do I have to give? But my manager at the time said, be prepared to give more than you're going to receive in networking. And that is the game. That's the best way to approach it. Because if you're always thinking about ways you can give to other people, and as somebody who is younger in their career, he told me, you have time, show up for people. That's the one thing you do have. Now, after 3-4 years of networking, I can provide a little bit more than time, at least. But still going in and saying, what can I provide? What can I help this person with? And really approaching every relationship with that you never truly know. I mean,
I'll give you an example. My early days in school, when I joined a fraternity, you build a network of friends that are going to turn into potential business folks. And some of my very early days of professional opportunities came about because of those networks.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of just reaching out to people and being open to the connection can be astounding. And I'll admit it's hard. I mean, there are people that if you took them to a room full of strangers, all standing there in nice clothes, jackets, blazers, whatever, and say, just go find someone and start talking to them. That can be frightening. I mean, who wants to go do that?
Yeah,
but
sounds terrifying.
If you stop for a second and you realize everyone in that room is in the same boat, or at least they were when they first joined that group or whatever. So, and everyone's very accommodating. I've never been to a networking event where I felt like someone was not open to having a conversation. That's just part of the situation.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I think to the point you were making before is the conversations that are weird are the ones where you go into a conversation, it's like automatically they're in like sales mode, and you're like, I'm just here to have a conversation with you. It's
Yeah.
it's a very strange. It's sort of backwards, I guess, of what people maybe think, and maybe that's why they feel so awkward about it. It's like if you just go at it from the perspective of, hey, I'm just here to have a conversation with you, and I just want to learn about you and whatever. It's so much easier. So I have a question for you then.
Sure.
Sort of you were talking about your start, your fraternity, your fraternity days, et cetera. Like, so I actually teach students at UMass Boston. We're going to be doing a networking event with them in a couple of weeks. We're doing a networking event with students at Bentley University in a couple of weeks. But wondering, what advice would you give to students who are just starting out, many of whom have probably never really had to network or wanted to network?
So the best advice that someone gave me is, when you meet someone you haven't met, listen more than you talk.
Mm-hmm.
Because the worst thing you can do is meet somebody at a networking event, stand there and talk to them for however long, 5, 10, 15 minutes, and walk away and not remember a thing about them.
Right.
Because what's the point? And whether you ask them for a business card, I'm still a fan of old-fashioned business cards, because you put those in your pocket. People bring out their phone and they say, I'm going to connect with you on LinkedIn. And there's no follow-up other than you have a new connection on LinkedIn, should you choose to go look at it. But if you grab a card or you give a card, then that will be a reminder to say, hey, I remember talking with this person. And if you really can, as soon as you finish the conversation, kind of walk away and somewhat furtively write a couple of notes on the back of the card.
Mm-hmm.
Say, hey, this is Tom, and he works for this bank, and he does these things. And we said we'd catch up for coffee later. And now you've got a record of that conversation. So maybe even from a broader perspective, I think the advice is to make sure you network intelligently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That means the people you meet, make sure you know who they are. Somehow, I've also got a notebook in my suit jacket pocket that I carry, and you just write notes. But
Mm-hmm.
then follow up.
Yeah.
Connect on LinkedIn. Reach out and offer to get coffee. Do something to leverage the connection into a valuable relationship, because networking is not just about connecting. It's about making the connection and then following up to foster the relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
through that follow-up, whether it's meeting or coffee or even a Zoom call afterwards, you find out more about what they're doing, how you might participate in their success, share with them what your goals are.
Right.
Meaning, I want to find a job. I want to find a
Mm-hmm.
client. I need to figure out what I'm doing. To your point with students, what should I focus on for finishing up my education? And that gives people the opportunity to help you.
Yeah.
So I think the best way I can summarize it is, to your students especially, would be understand how to do it well. Share of yourself so that you give other people the chance to help you. And also, just as importantly, make sure you understand what your new connection needs.
I guess, Joe, I'd be interested. How has your networking evolved? Again, it sounds like, unlike some folks, like a number of folks, they'll not really do anything. Then they have a change in circumstance. They're looking at new opportunity, for example, fractional CFO type roles, that sort of thing, right? And it's like, oh, crap, I should probably start doing. But, as you were doing before, and now based on what you're trying to accomplish now, how has that kind of evolved and changed?
Yeah, probably like most people, my network activity over the last 20, 30 years would rise and fall based on my situation. So you land a decent situation at work, you get really busy and involved in your current career, and the networking events both take on less importance, and you have fewer moments to engage in that.
Yep.
And then something changes, and wow, I need a follow-on situation, or I'm still working, but I want to do something differently. So I would say probably in the last 5 to 6 years, my activity for networking has increased, and especially in the last 2 or 3 years, just to foster the network. I've also changed location. Most my quote home is Austin, Texas, and we moved to Denver, then to Chicago, and now we're in the Boston area. And with each of those moves, I made a point to seek out local business networking groups or professional affiliations to foster connections in that market.
So I guess that, well, Jeff might ask the same question I'm going to ask, but
Well,
we'll see. That's one of the things that we've kind of discussed as a group, right? Is how is Boston networking different than other markets? A lot of times we have people who have formerly New York and then coming to Boston or whatever it might be. But just curious, Joe, like what have you seen in terms of differences between those regions versus Boston?
Yeah, I would say from Central Texas to Colorado to Chicago to here. Now, when I was in Chicago, there was COVID, so that didn't help. Did a lot of networking and on Zoom calls, and quite honestly, it was very tough to think about how many I went to in person just because of that. But I would say the people in Boston have been the most welcoming, and for those who are in New England, you'll get this. Almost everybody is from here, lives here, has been here forever. So I'm one of the newbies that, I'm not from Boston, and 30 years from now, I'll still not be from Boston. But I would say the professional networking folks in the business community that I've tapped into, everyone's been wonderful, very accepting, and open to making new connections. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, did you have any? It's funny. I feel like people actually generally don't say Boston people are friendly. So I'm happy that you've had that experience. But I'm curious, because everybody's been here forever and kind of knows they have their insulated circles. Did you struggle at all to tap into those circles? I know you're in FEI and that group is just an exception to the rule, because I feel like everyone there just is awesome and wants to genuinely get to know you. But did you have any experiences where you're like, wow, I really want to get into this group, and it was a little bit more challenging than you expected?
No.
Oh,
no,
good.
the major organizations that networking events I attend, FEI is probably the most prolific. There's a group in town called CFO Leadership Council.
Yep.
And I attend several of those events. Jack McCullough started this and does a fantastic job. And there's another group called C-Level Networking Community. And a friend of mine had referred me to that. And I actually was at an event last week, and the CEO of New Balance came to speak at that event. That was fantastic. They're holding another one in June where the CEO of Bank of America will be speaking. So, as everyone probably is aware, networking events or business professional associations, they do two things: provide opportunities to network, and they provide content. And sometimes the more interesting the content, the more people show up, so you get better networking opportunities. And so, there is a cost to go to these, but I think it's well worth it, and you get a lot out of it. But to answer your question, everyone's been open and welcoming, and I feel like I've generated a pretty decent network base for the folks here in town.
I'm happy to hear that. I am. That's why we started the podcast. We felt, we wanted to give people an opportunity to really build a community in the Boston area and give people a little bit more of a plug-in for. I mean, I'm from Boston, so that's why I don't know, I'm different, I think, in that I go to an event, I'm like, yeah, I grew up down the street. But I know Jeff and Steven, not so much. So.
Well, but it's funny for me because I grew up, I live 10 minutes away from the house where I grew up, right? And and my parents still live there. but I was gone for like 25 years and then came back here. But I will just to your point, Joe, like I was always from Boston. I never was from Boston, but it's been interesting, to come back here because I left, right after college and, didn't come back for, a couple of decades. So, it's been interesting to kind of come back to Boston and understand that there's such a vibrant business community here, which, by the way, I mean, my last corporate job was down in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm sure there was a vibrant community there, but I just wasn't involved in it because I had a day job and I didn't need to network. And so I think that's a really interesting, thing. I was just talking with somebody last week about they were sort of in this mode of looking for a job, and they said, yeah, or actually they weren't in the mode of looking for a job, and they said, I just don't know, why would I call somebody or network with somebody when I'm not looking for a job? And I'm like, that's the backwards way of looking at it. Like, networking now so that when you need a job, you should be looking for it.
Absolutely.
That's the part of this situation where people need to think with a long horizon.
Yeah.
And the person you meet tonight at a networking event may or may not provide an opportunity for you. But again, going back to one of my initial comments, that's not the only reason you do it. You have to be altruistic in this situation also, and say, I may meet someone and get to know them to the extent you do in a networking relationship, and sometime down the road you find out of an opportunity and you get to reach out and help somebody.
Exactly.
Again, I think this all moves around in circles, not to be, like I said, not karma-esque, but it's part of being in a community that can create connections that we don't know today what those are going to turn out like.
Absolutely. And I think to that point as well, bringing it full circle to the initial part of this conversation is, if you're only networking when you need a job, well, now you're going into networking thinking about what you need. You're not thinking about anything else. And that could be a huge block for building relationships, because like, you really never know. And maybe the person you met 6 years ago is now hiring, and you run into them and they, you're casually looking, or maybe you're not even looking. I mean, I wasn't looking. I got recruited out of my company through networking.
Yep.
And that's really where the best opportunities come from, especially in this market where, you hear people who, I know Jeff talks about it. We talk about it all the time. You hear, yeah, I've applied for 200 jobs and they haven't even gotten a call back. And and I know Jeff will say it, if you're applying on LinkedIn, you're already too late.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to your point, the reason I'm in Boston is because I worked for a company 20 years ago.
Right.
And a guy I met there, I find out he's in Chicago. And we reconnect just even for social reasons. And we find out another one of our former colleagues lives 2 blocks the other way in Chicago. What are the odds?
Yeah.
We reconnect again, simply just to rehash old times and whatnot. Months later, the second guy reaches out and says, hey, you need to talk to this recruiter because I hear they're looking for a CFO.
Yep.
I can't stress enough that if you maintain relationships for the right reasons,
right,
it has to provide value at some point.
Yeah. Maybe not now, but maybe in 20 years.
Exactly.
Well, so I'm thinking that there's the idea of serendipity, right? Chance, I'll say chance favors the prepared networker.
It does. And, and I recognize that it's really a challenge for some people to be open to do that.
Yeah.
And I've never felt like I had a personality that would do well in that situation. And so, for the lack of a better word, sometimes you just have to fake it.
Yeah.
You just have to pretend to be gregarious. You have to pretend to be open to meeting new people. You have to walk in that room and say, I have no idea, but I'm going to go give it a shot. and I think it works out fine. I think the biggest challenge, honestly, because I've got a family member and their friend is now looking for work, and it's not in the financial world. I think it's easy for finance folks because all these associations I rattled off are very oriented towards finance professionals.
Mhm.
Yes.
But I've got to think that most professions have professional associations
Yeah.
where you can seek them out, and
Absolutely.
especially in certain business communities, they'll have local things to go do.
Yeah.
And go find it.
Yep. Well, I would say even beyond that, right? Whether it's something that is specific to the business, but also local chambers or whatever it might be, like there is something for everybody out there.
Yeah.
So fully agreed. One other thing, quick, Joe, I know you mentioned the C-level communities. They have a May event as well on May 1st. And so that is one that I'll be going to. I'm not sure if you are as well, but that's with Jean-Charles Voss, who is who I know quite well. And I'm looking forward to that one. That'll be a lot of fun. And then before Jeff or Amelia call time, we talk about serendipity. And it's funny because today I'm at Bentley University. And the reason that I'm here is roughly a year ago, I was going to a meeting for the Private Directors Association. I've recently been in contact with a company, which is FireStable, which is where I'm the CFO now. And a big part of what we do is work with GCs, architects, et cetera. So as I'm walking to go to the PDA event, I see that there's this AGC MA thing. I'm like, GC, that's probably general, and it is. It's Associated General Contractors of Massachusetts. I popped and said, listen, I need to go to another meeting, but I imagine we have some things to talk about with the person who's registering, that sort of thing. A month later, get a reach out from Lisa Frisbee, who is in charge of advancement membership, that sort of thing, and said, hey, by the way, we're going to be doing an innovation panel with what you guys do with fireproof insulation. That's exactly the type of innovative type things that we do. And today I moderated a 45-minute panel, which was all about what we do at FireStable for fireproof insulation, right? So that truly is a full circle. And that's why I was scrambling to find a spot today at Bentley, but I did find one. So definitely serendipitous across the board.
And we're doing another event with Bentley because of this podcast, actually.
Exactly.
Inviting people on our podcast through networking, and they reached out and said, we want you to be part of a networking event with us.
Yeah. Well, I love Bentley. They're literally blocks that way. So
Yeah.
It's so the biggest challenge that I find once you start getting involved in networking is if you land some, a full-time job, if you land some clients and you start to get busy, maintaining that focus and attention to carve out the time to go carry it on and to maintain the relationships, that's another challenge. And it's you just have to find a way to do it. And it's another challenge, but I think it's also another opportunity.
Yes, I was on another thing recently, and this topic came up. And how do you actually do that, right? Like, do you set time on your calendar? What do you do? And one of the ways that I found that's probably the best is, number one, if you're doing a good job connecting with everybody on LinkedIn, use the birthday feature, use the new job, that sort of thing, right? And literally carve out 20 minutes a couple times a week, whatever it is, and literally just kind of work through that. And for most people, you're getting them once a year at least, right? Again, that's probably not optimal, but it's better than going dark.
Interesting.
Right.
Well, as Stephen predicted, I was about to call time because this half hour has flown by, Joe. This has been a great conversation. Really enjoyed this. As I mentioned before we started, we like to wrap up by asking people what's one cool event you're going to in the next week or so. So interested to hear, Joe, what's an event that you're headed towards soon?
Well, one event I'm going to is my niece's wedding in Dublin. That's not a networking event, but
it might be.
But that is really fun. So you're allowed to talk about it.
But I'm looking forward to the C-level event in April. That is, or actually it's in June. That is the Bank of America CEO. I'll probably try and make the CFO Leadership Council has a spring conference here in the Boston area. I like to go to those because it's amazing what you can learn when you bring, especially really high level folks in. And a couple of years ago, we had Jack had invited to the CFO Leadership Council the former CFO of Enron,
Mm.
Andy Fastow,
Cool.
and I
Yep.
thought that was fascinating. So
Interesting.
again, interesting what you can learn. But now those are coming up. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Stephen, you want to go next? Did I lose you?
Did you? No. Yeah, you
Steve.
did for a second. So when you said, "Did you lose me?" Hopefully, I'm back again. I'm on the
Yes.
Bentley
Yeah,
Wi-Fi.
I said, do you want to go next? And then you ghosted me. So I'm like, I have a hard
That
time.
would have been him exiting out of the screen.
Yeah.
There you go. No, so Joe, it's funny that you mentioned Andy Fastow. I've now had the opportunity to listen to him twice. One of them was actually at the this first CFE for the certified fraud examiner, and it was an ACFE event. That was just a fantastic presentation. So many interesting things there. I think for mine, I'll see you at the CFO Leadership Council in June. Looking forward to that. But
cool.
that's so far away. Tomorrow I have the life science update at Ropes and Gray. So that'll be my 8 to 10 a.m.
Nice.
Awesome.
in Cambridge.
I can go, Jeff.
Sure. Go for it.
I feel like we are a shameless plug for FEI here because I will be going to an FEI event tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow night. They have our Women's Speed Networking 2.0. So I was really bummed over the fall. I missed the event. It was actually my first day at Supporting Strategies, and I had taken a flight that got delayed, and I basically did not sleep on before my first day of work. And so I unfortunately skipped the event, and I heard it was a blast. So I'm really excited to do this, see what it's all about tomorrow night. And I have high expectations because, as we know, we love FEI events on this podcast.
Yeah, that sounds great. I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, thank you.
And then for me, I had like 3 events last week, 1 today, but what's coming up, I guess my next event is Joe Anderson, who Stephen and I have met and was actually on a different podcast that I'm part of last week, has an event, I think, every couple of months. And they're doing one on March 31st, Connects e-commerce at the Crafts Hall in Waltham, and it's always a fun event, always interesting, and a great panel where our friend Dina Baker will be one of the panelists. So we're looking forward to that. So,
and I love that venue too.
Yeah, nice to meet you, and a good event, and so. Well, this has been awesome, Joe. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate y'all taking the time and having an interest.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
We will see everyone next week.
Yeah, we'll see you all next week.
All right. Thanks. Y'all take care.
Thank you, Jeff.